Hi FlossTube, it's Karen with KB Studio Creations, and today I am going to do a tutorial on making wall hangings. For wall hangings, the tutorials that I've used to help me learn how to do wall hangings are Carolyn, Mazzeo, and Caterpillar Cross Stitch, and those are great ones. I will link them. I would highly recommend you watching them because they were a great starting point. I've developed my style a little bit differently in some places, and so I decided I would make a tutorial as well to kind of add to the conversation on making wall hangings. So first I'm going to show you wall hangings I have finished in the past. So this is the first one I did, and this pattern is Live Within Your Harvest by Nancy Wigman, and I think it's out of print. But I followed Carolyn Mazzeo's tutorial, added fabric around the edges, did the little strips for hanging in it, and I didn't even have a dowel back then, so it's on like it's a plastic piece. I think it's from like a hanger or something that was broken. Fabric on the back. So that's just basically the standard kind. The next one I did was this one. This is by Pixel Parade, and let me find what the pattern is called just a moment. Halloween Cat Portrait by the Pixel Parade. And this one I basically followed Caterpillar Cross Stitch's tutorial. It's very small. I did the batting, and I did probably too thick of a batting. I probably should have done a thinner batting. I also did not have a dowel at that point, so I actually just propped this up because it's so small and it stands up just fine. I put it on a bookshelf, but that was using her tutorial. The next one I did is one of my patterns. This is my Giraffe in my Animal Face series, and once again I just basically followed Carolyn Mazzeo's tutorial. You know, this one I used all the same fabric, but I did have a dowel and dowel ends this time, and some twine. This is actually like macrame cord that I've been using, so that's that one. The next one I did, this one's really big, won't be able to show you the whole thing at the same time. This is the 2018 Mystery Sampler from Linen and Threads, and I followed basically, I think, kind of like Caterpillar cross stitches, because I folded it over on the top. We just used some string, have my dowel and dowel ends, and at the bottom we did another one. Because this is so long, we just did one at the top and one at the bottom. Now these next ones start to diverge, and these ones have a pointed end and no fabric around them. So this one is my pattern Be Your Own Champion. I did fold it down on the top, kind of like in Caterpillar Cross Stitches tutorial. The other ones I had stained the wood. These ones I painted the wood. And this one I tucked the extra thread or extra cord down there. So this is one of the ways I'm going to show you today, is how to make one that has a point to it. Most especially, not one folded over like that one, but one that has some strips. So this is the first in our Runic Tribal Dragon series. And this is the black dragon. And so we're going to make one like this for the green dragon. Fabric on the back, strips to hold it on, and then all this. So this is what we're going to do today. We're also going to do one that is similar to this but has a flat bottom. So those are the two we're going to do today. I'll show you the originals. So one of these is, like I said, the green dragon. And then the other is my Christmas Maidens pattern. And this pattern was stitched, the model was stitched by Sarah King from Our Stitching Kingdom here on FlossTube. And hopefully I can show that all to you. So that one is going to just have a flat bottom. And so first I'm going to go through a list of supplies that you might need. And these will be in my show notes. And I will have links below to the various people I'm talking about. So, supplies. Finished cross stitch, iron-on interfacing, a coordinating fabric, matching thread, ribbon, optional. I'm actually trying this for the first time and I hope it works out. a ruler or measuring tape, or both, pencil, cutting mat, that's optional, scissors or a rotary fabric cutter, wooden dowel and wooden dowel ends, paint or wood stain, paintbrush or sponge brush, glue, that's optional, macrame cord or whatever you want to use to hang it with, sewing machine. If you, these are some things I'm using. I assume you're going to want to use the same things. If not, you can always, sew by hand or whatever. But sewing machine, iron, ironing board, and saw if you need to cut down your dowel to the correct size. So those are the supplies. The first step is to iron it and put on interfacing. I'm not going to show that step in the video. I'm going to do it and then come back and show you the result. If you need tips on how to iron your cross stitch, you can visit Vonna Pfeiffer's tutorials. I will link that below as well. She has a great tutorial. I don't necessarily follow everything she does, but if you want to know how to iron your cross stitch, it'll be great. One thing I do love, and we'll be using today, is best press. Some of those earlier ones, you saw there still had creases in it. That's because I didn't have best press yet. And yes, mine's broken. But best press is a great thing to help get out those stubborn creases. So now I have the iron on backing. I ironed it. And I'm not super precise. I just make sure I have enough to cover the entire area. And on this one, I used black interfacing. You could use white interfacing as well, but I just, with it being a dark fabric, I prefer the dark. So now it's time to cut it out. So you just decide how far away from the stitch you want, and then add in your seam allowance. So on the first one, we made it so it was a 1/2 inch from the edge of the finished cross stitch. So I'm making a mark there for 1/2 inch, and I'm going to do the same on this other side. And so this is what I'm doing for me. You may not need to do this, but I then draw a line all the way up and down where that is. And this is on Ada, so it's a little easier to see where the line is, but it's not perfect. But as you'll be able to tell, I'm not a super exacting person in my finishing. I'm very good with approximates. Now for the bottom, the first time I tried just measuring 1/2 inch from like the edges, and it was too close. So I'm going to do 1 inch. From various points. And now I'm going to connect the lines and hope they're pretty equal looking. And I'm realizing as I do this, and I'm remembering from last time, that because these sides aren't equal, they're not necessarily ending up equal. So what I'm going to do is find where this line meets up, draw a mark on the other side, and draw a new line. So these should be about the same. If you really wanted them exactly the same, you could always fold your piece in half when you're cutting it out. But for me, I just do approximates, and then I will now go cut this out. One thing I forgot to mention, these lines are actually the seam lines. This is where you're going to sew. So when you cut it, cut a seam allowance around it. You can do a second line if you want to cut out to show your seam allowance. I'm just going to freehand it, but you can, if you want, do a line that's, 1/4 inch or however much your seam allowance is going to be, so that you have the second line to cut on. So on the top, last time I also did a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I forgot to do this earlier in the video. So once again, you have a 1/2 inch. If you want, you can draw your line. I'm not going to draw the line, but basically just cut and leave some seam allowance as well. So for this one, I am also going to do pretty much a 1/2 inch. I don't need to, it's a straight line, so I don't need to really do a line on the back, and it wouldn't show up anyways because it's black. But, so what I'm going to do, so that's 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to have like a 1/4 inch seam. So that's where it's going to be. So I'm going to count how many threads, since this is Aida, and then we'll cut it that many away from the edge on each side. So now they're cut out. And I did want to say, so what I use to count to the edges, it's called a thread hopper. I'll put it against this dark fabric so you can see better. This one is from My Big Toe Designs, and I will link her shop below. This was actually given to me as a gift. But also, I was also given another one as a gift that a friend made, and she says that she learned about it from Stitcherista on her playlist Cross-Stitch Tutorials, FlossTube number 174. So I will link both of those below. They're very helpful for counting out your fabric. They're good, you know, when you're counting to various places in your stitching as well, but they're really nice for me when counting to the edge of my fabric to cut. So that one is cut, and this other one is cut as well. So we've gone ahead and ironed the fabric for the backing. If you have a rotary cutter, you can always use a rotary cutter to cut around this, or to measure your piece and cut a piece out that size. Basically, you need the backing to be the same size as the front. I don't have good luck with rotary cutters, so I'm just going to use regular scissors with it laid here on the fabric. So we now have backing fabric that is the same size as the front. Backing fabric, same size as the front. And now the next step is to cut out the strips that will hold it to the dowel. These ones we did at 2 inches wide by 4.5 inches long. That includes seam allowance. If you want them wider, just make them wider. I personally prefer them wider, but this is what we did for this one, so we're going to do the same on the one today. As for this other piece, I couldn't find a fabric that I thought would look good for the hangers, so I'm going to try something new. I'm going to use some ribbon. I don't know how well this will work, but I think it'll work okay because it's basically the same concept as the strips. I would prefer wider ribbon, but this is what I've got, so I'm hoping it will work okay. I now have 6 of these strips, so I'm going to take 2 and put the right sides together. You can pin it together if you want, but they're so thin I don't worry about it. It holds pretty well. Get them all lined up, and then sew a seam on each side. You will repeat that for all of them, and then you need to turn these right side out. To turn these inside out, I just start at the top and I separate it, and then I just start kind of pushing it through bit by bit, and then pulling to try to get it through. It takes a little while. You could use a chopstick or something like that to help push it through if you want, but just keep pushing it through. And when you're done, go iron it. And also, just so you know, the seam allowance I used, I went to the edge of my presser foot to determine my seam allowance. But you can, you know, once again, just decide how wide and what kind of seam allowance you want. The next few steps are the hardest steps for me. First, you need to put the fabrics facing side together, but you need to cushion these or sandwich these in between. You need to make sure you leave enough space for the edge. This one was a little close and it was really hard to stitch, so you know, I'm going to try to move it in a little bit more. And you try to make them equidistant, and you try to make them straight so that they hang correctly. I'm not perfect at this. It just takes time, and you do the best you can. So I will be pinning these together. So the first thing is I have my basic center mark, so I'm going to move this over a bit. You can also have it stick up a little bit so that you can see where they're at to help you when you're sewing. I think I'm going to do that. And it also helps me, it'll also help me hopefully measure them together. So that looks about straight. When I have it where I think about where it needs to be, I put a pin in. This next one, actually, let's see, since I'm on this cutting board, center that on there. And then this one will go to that mark. And I should be able to do an equal mark on the other side to hopefully make these kind of equidistant. And if you want to measure things, you know, with a measuring tape or whatever, you can be more exact. But like I said, I tend to not be exact in my finishing because I get tired of what I'm doing. So now looking at it, it looks like I've become off on my fabric. So I need to once again try to recenter this. So I'm gonna have to undo these pins that I just did. Actually, I think I'm gonna pin them to this top fabric. And then try to get this more centered again on the other fabric. It's not perfect, but so another thing I'm going to check, actually, I'm going to pin these corners because that will help it not shift. Ouch. I'm gonna fold this up and see if these look about straight. And these look pretty straight to me. Not exactly equidistant, so I think I'm going to try to move this center one a little this way because it also looks like it's not quite centered on the top of the pattern. Look at this again. That looks more centered. These look fairly straight. That one's not quite straight. Now it looks more straight. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. So now I'm going to pin the sides as well. And then I will go sew this. So now I'm going to sew around the edges, taking particular attention here at the top. You need to leave a space so you can turn it right side out. In the ones where I folded over the top, I left the top open, but since we have the hangers here, I leave a spot down here in the bottom. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think just right here at the bottom, you know, on this straight edge. So I'm going to start basically about right here. And like I said, with this line, I just sew right along the line. That's, I know where to keep the center of my needle. One thing I will note, I often just go off the edge of the fabric and backstitch it that way, doing a full line. You could also just turn at the corners, but I feel like that makes it a little more secure. You could also go forward and then backstitch and turn. It's just whatever you want. And now I'm doing the top edge. Once again, take extra care, slow down if you need to when you're going over this thicker fabric, because your machines can struggle some. At least mine does. Now for this last part, once again, you're gonna leave space here. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of the ways, actually a very tiny bit, because I definitely need it big enough to turn right side out. So make sure you trim your threads, and if you want to trim these, you can, and then turn it right side out. You can also clip your corners to help with the turning out of the corners.
Hi everybody, this is Jason with Karen. I do more of the hardware stuff for her, so I'm going to show you what I did for the dowels. And I apologize for the shaking because I'm recording and doing this. But since we already measured, the other pattern that we're working on is about the same as this one. So I'm just going to use this dowel to figure it out. What I did last time with this is I waited until this was done, and then I measured about how much room I wanted on either side. This to me didn't need to be that exact. just because I could center the hanging on the dowel. So as long as it was somewhat centered. So the dowel goes into about here on these ends. So I'm going to bring this one down to here, and then I'm going to measure right about there. And that's where I'm going to cut. And then I'll stain it, and it'll all be ready. These are 1/2-inch wooden dowels that we got from Lowe's. So any 1/2-inch dowels will do. The center part is a little bit smaller than a 1/2 inch, so I have to sand them until the ends can fit on. But that's all that I do for my part.
So I have turned it right side out and ironed it. Now the only thing I need to do at this stage is sew this up, and then this part will be done. And then it'll just be finishing up the hanger. I use a matching thread, and I use the ladder stitch. I will have a link below to a tutorial on how to do the ladder stitch if you do not know how to do it. I know there's other names for it as well, but just sew it up and you're almost done. So I've gone ahead and pinned this other one. I'm leaving space in the bottom for this one, and I have a little bit showing at the top. Like I said, I hope this ribbon will work for this. Really hoping that works. So now it's time to sew it. This time, instead of going all the way off for each end, I'm just backstitching, and then I'm going to put my needle down, turn the fabric, and go up the next, or then backstitch and go up the next side. So I have turned it right side out and ironed it and sewn up the bottom. So now it needs its hanger, the little rod and dowel. I was going to paint it white, but we've decided to stain it. So that's the next step.
Okay, so what I do whenever I'm putting this rod on, I will put one of these ends on first. How I typically do it is I insert the rod into the hole in the side, and then I'll find a flat surface to put it down on and push it in. These are really tight, so I find that I don't really need to put any glue or anything on. But once the rod is on this part, then I'll just slide the open end of the rod through the holes in the strips, and then I'll put the other end on and do the exact same thing where I put it up against a flat surface and push until it's firmly in. And there you go, it's on and hanging the way it should. From here, I'll just take the rope that I use and I cut it off and tie it off, and it's all good to go.
So we now have the finished products. It's been stained, put together, and then we just tie the macrame cord on. It's kind of blowing out. And then trim it. Maybe not the perfect way to do it, but that's how we do it. So I used a white macrame cord on this one. And we used an off-white tannish sort of color on this one.
I think it's called natural.
Jason says he thinks it's called natural. So that's that.
Also, I'm going to insert myself real quick.
Well, bend down so they can see you.
I know. Give me a second. How did this happen? I thought I had tied this though. If you can see, right here, I tied these wrong. I'm going to have to redo these. Whenever you're tying them, you want to be sure that the free end, you're pulling towards the back. It creates just a nicer look. I'm going to have to redo both of these. If you notice on these ones, the tie is facing towards the back, and so whenever you hang it in the front, it just has a whoop. Let me center that. It just looks a little nicer and a little more finished. Just creates a nicer look. I don't know what happened on this one. I'm going to have to redo it. But that's, let my error be the error that shows you don't do this.
I did want to make just a couple notes. So on this one, we sewed it up down here at the bottom. On this one, where I folded it over, I just did it along the sides, and then if you can see here, I just left it open at the bottom. I just folded it over and tacked it down. So that one you didn't have to sew up the bottom. You just tack it down once it's once you've got the rest of it done. And the same sort of thing with this big long one. Oh, upside down. I sewed it along the bottom. I don't know if you can see. And then I tacked it down, but I just sewed down. So I sewed all the way across, and then I tacked this down back this way. And then this one, I sewed this top part over. I made this fabric a little longer and then sewed it down along here and then tacked this down. So that's just how I did those ones, just in case you want to do ones that way. But I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, comments. But there you go. Happy stitching!